The government has begun vetting private security companies in line with the new Private Security Regulation Act 2016. The new act provides that all firms be issued with operating licenses by Private Security Regulatory Authority after a scrutiny of their conduct and mode of operations. Consequently, the country's over 2,000 private security firms have been directed to submit copies of their ownership details and certificates of incorporation to the authority's Lowno House offices ahead of a fresh registration exercise scheduled for April next year. All the firms are also required to declare their 3-year audited accounts, copies of the Kenya Revenue Authority PIN certificates alongside those of their directors, trustees and shareholders. The government also wants the firm's directors, trustees and shareholders to deliver copies of good conduct certificates. The regulations, I should say, demand that any person engaged in the provision of private security should bear no past criminal record, including human rights violations. The government intends to weed out non-compliant firms by March. Now, last week, Interior CS Fred Matiang'i declared war against the non-compliant firms as part of the government's effort to streamline the sector to enable it to provide complementary security services. We just want to also hear from our panelists in this new development that is here. A lot of issues also are rising as far as the Private Security Regulations Act is concerned. And we just want to begin with Silvana Sewe, who is the Executive Director of Global Forensic Services Limited, to tell us more about this new development as well. Are you happy with this new development from the Ministry of Interior?
Dibal, it is good to put these things into context. The issue of regulating the sector emanated from the sector itself.
From the sector itself?
The sector itself, in 2004, and the captain can attest to this. The spirit and the principle of that act, it has 4 clear objectives. To regulate the private security industry in accordance with the principle and the values of the Constitution. To regulate private security companies licensed in Kenya and operating outside the Republic of Kenya. To regulate foreign companies operating in the Republic of Kenya. And to provide a framework of cooperation between national security organs and private security players. Those are the 4 principles. The same act says that the authority which is mandated to provide leadership of that particular entity must provide access of the services across the country. It's in law, in black and white. They must make sure that they provide that particular ability. So the contents of the acts are very clear at the end of the day. Every stakeholder, every player being the people, and I'm on record in 2015, as my good brother Captain has alluded to. We normally have what we call Speakers Roundtable. So in 2015, I presented a reason why the sector was supposed to be regulated when we were having Speakers Roundtable in Mombasa. And actually, if you go to Hansard of June 2015, the parliamentarians were saying that this thing, it was explained in a way that it was making sense. Because what people used to believe is that if you license the private security industry, what was coming into their mind is that you are creating private military security companies, which have operated in failed states at the end of the day. And one of the things that is being discussed is Section 53, about arming. We're very contentious at the end of the day. Then if you look at this particular act, it has 19 functions, which are supposed to be performed by the authority. 19. We are only picking a very few to make sure that we discuss them and see how best we can make sure that we put politics into it. Regulation of this particular sector will affect players beyond the 2 actor stakeholders whom we keep on talking about. Private security provider and the private security guards. Remember, we have the customer or the consumers in it at the end of the day, who are equally protected under Article 46 of the Republic of Kenya. That any service that they are getting must be within the reach which they can afford. We are not saying that we don't have problems. The only problem, that small difference that came in, was because of the regulations which were supposed to operationalize this particular act at the end of the day. And if you look at the way they were brought, is what was being just raised with the different authorities. Was there enough consultation to the stakeholders? Participation is entrenched in 118 and 10 at the end of the day. So they were simply saying, can we make sure that when you're doing this thing, we do it in line with what is required with the law? And what parliamentarians did, and they asked a very simple question. I was in attendance when the different stakeholders were presenting their petitions. They asked the ministry, did you do regulatory impact assessment of these regulations? The answer was no. Actually, in their own words, they said they will task their respective county commissioners to make sure that they conduct the same. Then Parliament said, no, this thing has an impact. So why don't you make sure that you just go back? That's one of the reasons that they picked, and make sure that everybody is involved. Being unregulated for those years, we are not saying there are no challenges. The challenges are there. Some people are getting what they're supposed to get, some people are being underpaid. But what is coming out is very clear. Probably we are only looking at very small farms which are meeting the regulatory requirement. And if you look at these farms, most of them are foreign-owned companies at the end of the day. What does that act say? A foreign-owned company is supposed to make sure that by March, if we are to go with these things, they're supposed to have 25% local ownership for them to operate in this particular country at the end of the day. Are we chasing away investors? The same act says that we're supposed to promote the private security players so that they can make sure that they contribute to economic development. Remember, it's a sector that has employed over 500,000 Kenyans at the end of the day. We have local private security firms which have already ventured into other jurisdictions out, including Uganda. What are these regulations doing to make sure that they also create a conducive environment for us to venture out the same way the other firms are venturing into our local market? So just to put it clear, nobody is against these regulations. We are simply saying the methodology that was used is what is supposed to bring all the stakeholders so that once again, we don't protect 50,000 employees at the expense of 450,000 when the government is simply saying we need to make sure that we create an employment. Heavenly on earth, the same regulation says, employ 10,000 Kenyans, then you're penalized for it. You pay 2 million. Does it mean that companies which have employed Kenyans over 1,000 also normally pay the same? Those are the questions that we are asking. But in terms of regulations, I don't refuse. Some companies are operating in a very awkward way, and they need to be brought to make sure that they comply with what is required.
I think you've laid out, of course, a very good case for this particular act and why also they should be going through vetings. But of course, you have some scruples as well. And we just want to discuss with the panelists briefly. Let's hear from Werunga briefly. Then we also gravitate to other topics as well.
Are you speaking as KEPSA or as the owner of that company? Before I talk.
I'm speaking as an interested industry player.
So not KEPSA?
Not KEPSA.
Okay. Let's start from there. First, for close to 10 years, I've been meeting this gentleman in those workshops, discussing this private security sector act. We've gone to workshops, we've gone to meetings, we've gone to public sessions for close to 10 years. Right or wrong? No, right or wrong?
That's right.
After we've gotten this act, after serious lobbying in Parliament, the organization was a bit moribund when it was gazetted and operationalized. But I think a gentleman came there who started putting things in place. And I can tell you, before I left this country, we went to many meetings discussing this debacle. Everything that the government is talking about was not done in Harambee House. And I'm not saying this because I have any interest. I mean, I have nothing with the authority or that with the security sector. Nothing was done in Harambee House. It was either Naivasha, it was either Kisumu, it was either government school in Kabete. People, company owners and representatives being called to discuss these things. Many, not one. Then when the regulations are out, that's when people realize, oh, okay, I cannot employ somebody if that person has no certificate. I cannot employ somebody. I mean, if you are paying 2 million for 10,000, and the bank is asked to pay 100 million to open a bank, I mean, every industry must have regulations. Why are you paying that money? Security for the government. To know that you'll not wake up today, you sack people tomorrow, and then you say the company is insolvent. So I want this panel to understand me very clearly. The regulations are out, people are called, and they were validated. I want you people to listen to me. Validation, you know what is validation? Stakeholders were called, the regulations were validated before they were gazetted. Yes, they might have missed one or two things. I don't speak for this government. I've never spoken for it. But I think it's important that when cartels want to stop what is good for the private security industry, we need to speak. It was validated.
And which cartels will be this we're talking
Big
about?
companies. I'm coming. Briefly, I'm coming to that. So when these things were validated through workshops, then they were gazetted by the government of Kenya. But let me tell you this. Within the industry, we have what we call the big and the small. So the big belong to Kenya Security Industry Association. The small belong to Private Security Industry Association. Then the others that have come up. So the small are basically the Africanized ones. The big are the big ones. G4S, Security Group, Wells Fargo. So them, they had already created a cartel until these other small companies created the Private Security Industry Association. Now, when the government came and said we need to regulate the private security industry, Dibal, I'll tell you this. I know of companies that pay these security companies 50,000 per guard, and the guard is paid 8,000. What logic, what business logic are you talking about? And the regulation was very simple. We want to have a minimum wage declared by the government, that guards in this country must be paid this minimum wage, so that even as you go to seek for work from people who are supposed to give you work, you go knowing that the minimum wage for this guard is 14,000. Anything you demand that is not going to take care of this guard, you are going against your own business ethos. So it is a very clear thing, and I don't agree with my friend here, and we've worked together for long. But on this one, the government must be firm. We must remove cartels in this security industry. You will find guards outside here earning 3,000 shillings. And the owner of that company is paid 20,000. What we said is very simple. Take 20,000, remove your taxes, pay this guard well, and make your profit. Because you have office operations, you have salaries to pay as a company, you have taxes to pay, but at least ensure that this guard is paid well. So I think that is where we need to start from discussion. I hope I've laid it better. Yeah. Because I've been in this industry my whole life.
We give him a right of reply, then we come to us, because I think also the misunderstanding that is, and I'm wondering, you've been on the same board
yes, for many years.
For many years, yes. So how come, yeah? But you've been away from the country as well.
No,
maybe also maybe some
Only 8 months.
Maybe we need to bring you up to speed with so much that is happening. But let's just give him then, of course, we wind up on it briefly. We take a cursory look from all of us. Or, also
I respect Captain a lot, but it is always important to make sure that we put the facts right. I personally attended the presentation of Minister of Interior when they are doing their presentation to Parliamentary Committee on Delegated Legislation.
That's the other day.
They had...
Let him finish.
They had their evidence, which only had one stakeholder engagement, which was KSG. I've led what you're telling me to confirm KEPSA, Security Sector Board, since 2008. I've never seen any group being called for a meeting in Kisumu. Apart from the NITA that we went with you in Kisumu, which was basically a different issue. Let me put it clear. Nobody is against making sure that the industry operates to the best of its ability to serve Kenyans. We only need to say all the stakeholders are supposed to be done what? To be involved at the end of the day. And it is on public knowledge. I was in that board, Private Security Regulatory Board. I have more information than the way Captain is saying. Remember, this act says it is the board which is supposed to provide governance of that particular entity. No single day was the board involved in these regulations, including the one which talks about cooperation. And it's very clear. The Cabinet Secretary, the Inspector General, and the authority shall consult.
All right.
Those are politics.
Let's get reactions right now. Dr. Hassan Khonenje.
Yes. I think the two gentlemen probably have more information on that than, well, some of us here, but this is what I would say. If 2 million has to apply to everybody, then that is a concern. But if 2 million has to apply someone who has 10,000 employees, then that is very little. My conservative calculation says that if you have 10,000 employees paying 20,000 per person, that is 200 million a month, that's 2.4 billion in a year. You should pay at least 200 million out of that to the government, as in we need taxes to run this country. So if 10,000 people are only paying 2 million, then why should we be complaining about SportPesa paying too little? Really, you know? Now, regulation, I think, is important. So we cannot have an arbitrary number unless there is, if it's for everybody, it's a challenge. But if those are the numbers they're talking about, I think we should actually revisit that. Number two, anybody who has seen private guards, you know, a lot of them, they're underpaid, they're exploited. They don't, some of them are not even given their labor rights that they're entitled to. They're not given, you know, days off and stuff like that. And I think all of us here, in one way or another, we actually experience those private guards. And some of us have family members who actually do that, you know, at the same time. So regulation is necessary. Now, the challenge sometimes in this country is when things are being discussed, sometimes some stakeholders elect to stay away. And as they say, when you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So when the product comes out and it's affecting you, sometimes you actually start complaining. However, we have to regulate this industry the same way we're going to regulate everybody else. But we, of course, we cannot set arbitrary numbers. They have to be based on something. But if in fact it's actually true that 10,000 are only required to pay 2 million, then that is a slap in the face of all Kenyans, and we actually need to go back and increase it.
All right. Is that the main bone of contention as it is right now? Let's just get reaction. Yeah,
Okay.
that is not the main bone of contention as it is, isn't it?
Yeah, because we
That is
understand it's better with him.
Yes.
That is not really the issue here.
Let's hear from Hashi. We'll
Yeah.
come to you. Then please.
You know, this is not my plate of lunch, but
Then if it's not, then can we just go to a person who at least,
Okay,
let's hear prayer for Mirungu.
No, cases
The aspect of human rights has been mentioned as well, that people with past criminal records as well. You can chime in, but I'm not really confining you to that. You can actually open the discussion to...
So as I hear it from, you know, just what I can see in the press, but also I think my colleagues here on the panel, you know, the sector has been unregulated for many years. There are competing interests. The interests are not equal. There are large institutions and small institutions. And I think the way that it's been framed is that there has been inadequate consultation that's taken place. And I think that's the disagreement. On one hand, I think there's an argument that there has been consultation, and at this point, really, it's just the hard decisions that are left. And people should not, the industry should not hide itself behind the call for more consultation simply because it cannot make the hard decisions. I think there are two things for me. One is, three things. One is professionalization, and that's clear, and I think there's no disagreement with that. And the third one, I think, is regulation by a regulatory body, but also by a regulatory set of standards of regulation. And I think those two are probably not contentious. The one that I would be interested to hear a bit more, and I think Kenyans need to be to weigh in on a little bit on this, is whether the weaponizing of security guards and their increasing involvement in public order activities will be accompanied by higher standards than we have seen even within the police service. And the concern that I would have as we lean into the next elections is to ensure that we do not have private security firms being used in the political arena, and then secondly also not being used in a manner in which citizens are being brutalized and beaten, similar to what we saw in 2008 and also in 2017. So I think this is the concern that I think some of us would also put on the table and say, how is this going to be safeguarded against when we have VIPs who use their security detail either to evade arrest, lawful calls for arrest, or even simply to beat up their political opponents. And I think that's the challenge that, again, I would like to hear a bit more about how is that being managed within these new regulations.
Right. Dr. Sungi?
Yes, so he was in my head, I think. I almost had the same points I wanted to raise. But for me, I think the crucial question here is, are we privatizing law enforcement duties?
Exactly.
And I think that is crucial. And if the answer is in the affirmative, then issues of training come into play here. Because it's a risky job also. Security guards, I think, engage in some very risky types of activities to their own self and to others. And therefore, I think issues of training should be should be emphasized.
Right. So the other question maybe that I think you've raised, and I wanted just to get clarification. It's not all, I don't know what tier of selection are you using, especially to arm the security guards? Because from the beginning we thought it will be all security guards that we have in the country will be armed as well. But now I think also from the regulatory act we have clarity on that. Maybe you can pull it on the table and tell us who are going to be armed and what sort of criteria is the government using to arm the security guards? Briefly, before we move on to other topics.
No, that one I've been away. I know it started when I was around, so I really don't know what has been.
So you agree you're not really up to speed?
No, on this one. On this one.
Okay, so you've been from the get-going, of course, with the process. You can tell us more.
Okay, two things. Most of the jurisdictions which are trying to regulate this particular new industry have always been forced to make a very hard decision. Is it a national security issue or is it a business issue?
Yeah.
Or is it a mix of the two? Then the other variables will now start falling in place. Actually, most of the jurisdictions have totally barred foreign companies from operating within the jurisdictions. Some have given it 50-50 the way Kenya has done.
Yes.
The issue of arming, it has always been a very contentious issue. But remember, it is important to acknowledge that every Kenyan is entitled to be licensed under the Firearms Act, as long as you meet the requirement which is stipulated in that particular act. So our argument was, why are you discriminating the members of the private security industry? That was an initial argument. But we're also very cautious on arming people so that we don't create private security military companies in this country at the end of the day. And I can report that ministry, using its own wisdom, saw the sense and said that the issue of arming will be very specific to the services which needs that level of protection.
Which are what?
Including making sure that they carry extensive vetting, especially when you're dealing with cash on transit, when you're protecting VIPs at the end of the day. But they are yet to come up with regulations to give the guidance. Those ones are now statements which they've been giving, but they have also realized it is important to make sure that we go slow on that particular bit so that we don't arm the 500,000 Kenyans plus. Because the example that we have always been giving is the example of Uganda. But you all acknowledge that, for example, the debate that we had about Uganda and Rwanda, the culture of Uganda, the culture of Kenya, the culture of Nini are totally different. So we can't blanketly take the practice which is being done in other country and bring it into our jurisdictions. So the government is going slow. They are working on the regulations. They are not yet out, so that it will only be given on merit or case-by-case basis. That blanket issuing of the private security guards with the arms is no longer there. Otherwise, Daktari there and my brother Captain would have dealt with me, because they could have been armed as you're seated here.
But I think it's important, Dibal, that we regulate this industry. And I think we also need to distinguish. There's private security in the context of what we have in Kenya, but you also have private security companies and private military companies in the context of post-conflict reconstruction scenarios. So when you have a private security company like in Iraq, it's not the same private security company in Kenya. So we need to give that distinction. So every time we talk about ours is here, it's a private security industry. And we leave it at that so that they know at some point, according to our constitution and the laws, I think the National Police Service Act and the regulation, which section is that talks about them being used by the National Police to augment their services. So it is already in law. What is required is just how then do we formalize this and ensure that those that are going to be armed have made stringent measures before they are given, either as companies or as individuals.
Right, thank you. I think we've exhaustively, unless you, Dr.
No,
Sewe,
I just wanted to emphasize.
Yes,
so
please.
I'm reading the Private Security Regulations Act 2016, and Part 7 of the Act talks about the general powers of the private security service providers. Article 46, 47, 48, 49. Article 50 talks about powers excludes police powers, and it says, for the avoidance of doubt, nothing contained in this part shall be construed as conferring upon a private security service provider, a security guard, or a security officer the powers of the police officer or member of a disciplined service. But if you look at these powers, they are akin to powers that law enforcement officers have. Power to arrest, power to search, power to record and temporarily withhold identification documents, right to report a violation of the law. So again, I think the emphasis on training here should be emphasized. Though I don't make a very clear, I don't think there's a clear distinction between private military companies and private security companies. I think to my understanding, they are basically the same thing.
Right, thank you.
But however, it depends on the jurisdiction. It depends on the jurisdiction.
Okay,
Let's be clear.
Just to be clear,
Yes.
Dibale, if you look at, for example, is it Blackwater?
Yes.
That was operating in Iraq. It was an American-owned company. And since America did not want to involve directly using its national military whatever, it went in as a contracted firm. But in the process, now they were allowed to arm. And these people ended up participating in managing civil whatever, and 17 people were killed. And it's a case that took so long in US trying to arbitrate, where do we put some of these demarcations at the end of the day? So if you're talking about private security military, remember there is the concept of military. It is not totally different. We don't talk about private security companies at the end of the day. And what you have alluded to, Dr. in terms of those areas, they're very explicit. But just to put it to context, if you go to our constitution, Article 247,
Yes.
it gives the government and the Republic of Kenya the powers to create other police services to complement and support the national security organs. So in terms of regulations, we are all in concurrency. We are saying the sector needs to be regulated so that all the stakeholders, and my word is all the stakeholders, should benefit from that efficient and effective authority that will make sure that our economy goes to the next level. Because nowadays, this is business.
Well, to me, the distinction here, the key word here is private. So they do not follow the mainstream hierarchical orders that are maintained, for example, by the military or the law enforcement officers.
I think that is a debate for another day, or you need to clarify before we move on to Mandera and Wajir.
I'm a guru.
Ash is really rolling his eyes today. But you
just a
need to,
second.
I'm not rolling my eyes.
okay.
I'm rolling my
I'm a
mind.
guru in security sector reform. Diban, I can say I'm a guru in security sector reform. I've been a trainer for over 10 years. And we know the exact difference between a private security company, a private military company, and a regulated private security industry operator. Those two, private security company and private military company, are only operational in post-conflict situations. But when you are talking about a stabilized nation like this one, we talk about actors in the private security industry.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Right, so we'll be remiss if we don't really talk about what happened to 8 of us security personnel that were blown off by the Al-Shabaab militia using an IED, and of course the country is still mourning on that particular incident that happened when the Medina bus company was blown away. So we just want to discuss this in light of first of all, really pay our condolences to the families that were affected by this. Dr. And let's begin with Hashi on this as well. It seems we have pockets of them, especially on that northern frontier, who are still giving us sleepless nights.
Well, this is going to happen again and again and again because it's an issue that I think in the last 10 years the Kenya government and our security forces have actually been doing a superb job in trying to contain this thing. But there's going to be a slip up here and there because when you're fighting this kind of insurgency, it's very difficult to contain every situation that arises. I think that part of the thing that we need to do or need to understand is the role of the population in understanding and giving information to our security apparatus and institutions as to how these things happen. I think the people have a very important role to play because they know the landscape, they know the communities, they know what everybody who's coming in and who's coming out. And I think that the frontline counties have to be like an organism of intelligence themselves so that they also protect their communities. But it's going to be difficult to clamp out all these things 100%. I mean, the state and the security institutions are going to try as much as they can, but things like this are going to happen. And I've always said that the connection to this thing is ultimately to get a state system in Somalia that actually takes responsibility for its own security. The problem is that there's so much vested interest in Somalia now that to see a state that emerges out of Somalia and takes responsibility of its security, may take a lot of time. It may take a lot of time, but ultimately that's the solution to the problem of terrorism in this region. And if the states in the region really commit, this is 2019, Somalia is without a government for 30 years now. It is, it is just it's shocking that it's 30 years. And I think that it also behooves us as states in the region that we have failed to a certain extent to try and resurrect that state. And all these attacks that we're suffering and all these terrorism issues that we're getting is because the international community and particularly the region have been unable to make sure that Somalia has a state.
All right, Irungi Houghton.
So I can only but just agree with what Hashi said. I think just to add, that our officers, many of them are young. They are essentially at the start of their careers. They face a very deadly enemy that has no respect for life or the law. I just hope that it's a bit late now, but the Jamhuri commendations will be announced as always this year. It would be great if the 9 officers at least receive a mention, if they cannot at this late stage receive a commendation for their service to the nation. And again, I can only echo kind of our condolences to the family, but just to say that these are shuja, these are people who stand in the face of a deadly threat that threatens not just us individually, but threatens our way of life, our democratic and national ethos as a country.
All right. Let's hear from Dr. Runga and Hassan Hanenja. Hassan Hanenja.
Yeah, I think what this says, it speaks to the resilience and persistence of the Al-Shabaab group as a terrorist organization, and just how they've been able to maintain their presence, not just in Somalia, but also in Kenya. But it also underscores the importance of community policy. Someone must have tipped them. Someone must have given some information. How would they know they just stop one person, that the police officers in there? Now, from my understanding, and I could be wrong, that they were not armed, the police officers in there. So I'm thinking they might not have been in official uniform. And if that is in fact the case, then of course someone has information. But what that also says is, not many times do we see law enforcement as vulnerable population, but it's extremely vulnerable in the age of terror. And protection, I think, should always accompany them. They should be allowed to be armed, or at least to be escorted with an armed convoy, or at least to actually be carrying their firearms. So at least they, because in this case they were simply sitting ducks, who got massacred, like that. But what also this says is we need to find a way of actually stabilizing the Somalian nation. There are a lot of challenges. I think the only part of all of Somalia that has been relatively stable, of course, now you have, ISIS trying to make inroads, stuff like this, Somaliland, which right now is also facing its own challenges, and perhaps even terrorists can actually try to exploit that because they haven't had elections in about 14 years. I think they've postponed it, and there's a lot of noise, on that island right now. And so, in this region, we cannot win this war alone. We can only win it collectively. But Kenyan citizens need to understand that this is not a government war. This is our war. This is all of us. And because people had information for that to happen the way it did, and I am 100% sure that someone must have witnessed, because these things just don't happen in a vacuum. People can be able to be allowed to come forth, but then we also need to create safe space for people to report such cases, not to victimize people who report or who have some information, or just because they were in a wrong place at a wrong time, because what happens discourages people from coming forward with information for fear of being victimized. So I think we have to be very careful in the way we go about this, but my thoughts and prayers go to the families and friends of those who lost, their lives. It's always a sad day in Kenya when we lose our young men and women, especially to the Al-Shabaab attacks.
But we are being told also maybe this was information that was leaked from inside regarding this, especially this 8 personnel that are actually in this particular bus. So it's not really a matter of maybe witnesses outside as well, which is good. I agree with you totally. But was there also someone working from the inside? Because this is just a happenstance. It just takes away 8 soldiers in one fell swoop. I think there was a leakages, and people also within the security system are sort of, compromising the intelligence.
Yeah, I would say that is highly possible, because how could they have known? But secondly, when people are finding information, sometimes they might not exactly ask directly. Sometimes you might find yourself supplying information to actually someone who wishes you harm, very unaware of the potential effect that that's going to have. Someone asks, who are you traveling with? Oh, I'm traveling with so and so. Because Al-Shabaab has a network, and in fact has a spy wing at the same time. That's what we don't understand. It has an intelligence wing.
That's called the Amniyat.
Amniyat, exactly. And they are working day and night. And so, as Kenyans, we have to be aware, please, let's not reveal, for instance, when our security services are traveling, or they're going somewhere, okay, this is what is happening, unless it is something that is a matter you have to do, or someone you actually trust. But when you share information anyhow, it's going to get us in trouble. However, it's also possible that someone literally traveled with them who actually shared that information and knew all their plans.
Right, thank you. Let's hear from Warunga Sewe.
I don't have much because these things are happening too often, but I want to share a little bit of what we used to do in the military. If you look at what is happening on matters of terrorism in this country, the only place where Al-Shabaab will come armed with guns are certain areas of this country, but the rest they'll be using explosives. So if I was a strategist in the National Police Service, I'll know that the moment you cross Mwingi, from there you can meet Al-Shabaab anywhere on the road, and they're armed with guns, small arms and whatever. The moment you cross Isiolo, for example, there you can meet Al-Shabaab, they'll ambush you and whatever. I cannot understand how we can allow our police officers, even if they're on leave, to enter a bus without their ammunition. That is what really shocked me, because common sense tells us, and everybody agrees on this table, that the only place where Al-Shabaab will attack you with small arms are certain regions of this country. The Lam region, the Boni Forest, the former upper eastern, northeastern of Kenya. And then you allow 8 police officers travel in a bus, not armed, and they're going into a station that is under those areas. That is my only question, and that's why I can't speak much, because I can't understand.
Right.
I cannot understand how.
Right, thank you. So we wind up on it, then we move on across the borders, we see what is happening.
First of all, let me also send my condolences to the families who lost their loved ones. But let us get some facts in a slightly different perspective. If I look at, for example, what happened in Wajir, and I look at the position of Wajir and Mandera, and I go north and look at Nigeria and look at the position of Borno State, I go to Congo and look at the position of Beni, which is also far east, and the incidents which are taking place. It means that the leadership of those respective countries are supposed to make sure that they rethink the way they are looking the eastern part of their countries at the end of the day. Because what is happening, in my own view, from the eastern part of the country, eastern part of most of those countries, is it seems as if there are groups which are creating very soft environment for these terror groups. And they have been meant to believe, and most of the training, this is why I also say, we need to also to rechange the way we are conducting our trainings. Each and every time we have an attack, what normally comes is Al-Shabaab. Each and every time we have an attack, it's the terrorism. Yet we know very well, if you look at those studies, we also have the problem of insurgents groups within these particular areas. So how do we manage these particular insurgents groups? And I can commend without fear of contradiction. As a country, we've really tried our level best to make sure, because this is a global problem at the end of the day. NCTC has tried its level best, National Counter-Terrorism Training Center, to make sure that they enlighten people in different areas. But once again, as a country, we have acknowledged and realized that we need to have a paradigm shift from only thinking military to what has been alluded to make sure that we also bring people. And that's why there's a proposal in that particular document of BBI. Can we rethink from national security to human security so that we bring people into it, so that we participate and see how best. Of course, looking at all the other elements which can make their life more bit comfortable at the end of the day. But we need to re-understand the way we are looking at the east of these particular countries. Because those positions, if you look at them, they are all in the same, almost geographical place, having the same challenges at the end of the day.
All right.
Okay.
Dibal, can I also chime in? Yeah, I wouldn't want to repeat what my esteemed panelists have talked about, but perhaps I've said this again, that Ethiopia also shares a border with Somalia, but we rarely see such types of events occurring in that country. So I think it raises a question, a reflection of what is happening in Ethiopia vis-a-vis in our country here. But also raises the question that my friend has also talked about, is responding to terrorism, should it be a global war? Should we take military responses vis-a-vis law enforcement responses? So I think such events now demands us to lean on the military responses, and that's what is happening across the world. So I think it's a serious issue, and I think the government needs to do something about this.
Right, thank you. Oh, right. We just wanted to bring us up to speed as well as far as Ethiopia is concerned, where Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has received Nobel Peace Prize in Oslo. It says Prime Minister Abiy won the prize in part for making peace with Eritrea after a 2-decade conflict. This is courtesy of Al Jazeera. And Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, he continues to say, has received the Nobel Peace Prize. Oops, let me just go back there quickly. I don't know why it's tripping up here. And hailed the role played by former for Eritrea in solving the long-running conflict between the two countries, saying this, I accept this award on behalf of Ethiopians and Eritreans, especially those who made the ultimate sacrifice in the cause of peace, Abiy said on Tuesday after he received the prestigious award in a formal ceremony at Oslo City Hall. And maybe we can just discuss the bit of where the officials, they were questioning his media appearance, where he had declined his, of course, to make statements to the media, and they were saying this is refusal to face public questioning is highly problematic.
Well, Dibal, if I can say two things about that.
Briefly, yes.
Quickly, that I think it's good that he didn't face those questions. And
why not?
Because, you know, Mr. Prime Minister there is really balancing probably the largest political, economic, and social transformation in Africa in the 20th and the 21st century. Probably South Africa is equal to that transition in Ethiopia, because Ethiopia has been in a system for about 500, 600, 700 years that has been very feudal, based on strongman monarchies and dictatorships, and it's made up of hundreds of different ethnic nations. So for Africa to succeed and to move forward, Ethiopia has to succeed, because it is the heart of this continent. And it is really important for us to understand that we have a very precious, precious voice. You know, in any age, if that leader was not there, it would be invented. And there's an invention now of a leader like Abiy. And every time someone loses hope in Africa, and every time someone sees a dictator, say, in the Gulf of the Atlantic, or sees the problems that we have in this continent, then Abiy comes along, and you become hopeful about being an African again. I think that his personal culture and his personal conduct does not allow him to go and stand somewhere and receive something and be glorified about it. He didn't want to do that because his culture doesn't allow it. I understand it, because my culture is also the same. But the thing about it is, we have to understand that we ought to look at, we need to look at Abiy from a very African perspective. And it's really important for us to support this man, because what he's trying to do in Ethiopia is close to a miracle. And if this transition does not work in Ethiopia, I think it will. what's going to happen is it's going to stop a lot of the transitions that we want to happen in many of these countries that have not moved from the past and into the future. In his speech, something that really, really touched my heart was while the world was moving ahead, we in Africa were fighting over ethnic issues and borders and little hamlets that had just sand. And the world is leaving this continent precisely because we are fighting over grudges. Somalia next door is a homogeneous country with the same faith, the same language. They're fighting over grudges, clan grudges. If you look at our own country, our transitions have been marred, but we're trying to do the right thing there. Last point on Abi. I think Debal, this man is a precious voice in our continent, and we really hope that he succeeds, and we ought to support him.
Right, Irungu Houghton.
So last night I attended the Public Jurist of the Year Awards, the Pro Bono Jurist Award, and I was reflecting again on what's the power of awards and commendations, and the Nobel Peace Prize is probably the most prestigious one. And I think thinking about these awards powerfully, they are less of a statement of commendation of what you have done in the past, but really an opportunity and a platform to do great things in the future.
Yeah.
So I think we have to see this in this context. And I guess there are a couple of things. We know why he has been awarded. It was largely to do with the peace that he brought between Eritrea and Ethiopia, the wide-ranging human rights reforms that he's introduced, and really the development of potentially a democratic state.
Yeah.
Is it premature to give him the Nobel laureate? Time will tell. But I think the one thing that is important about this is it does give him a global stage and a global opportunity to demonstrate that in a country as complex and ethnically diverse as Ethiopia, and with the history and legacy of repression, that it is possible to build a modern democratic state that the entire world can be proud of. And I think that's the challenge that he must put. That's the challenge we must put before him. I was a bit disappointed that he won't address the press, because I think he's extremely he can be extremely inspiring. That's an opportunity for him to really send a message to all the other leaders across the world, and they're not very many like him. That actually the way that you succeed is essentially by opening up society, opening up the state to be more accountable, and that's what leadership is in 2020. And I think that's the opportunity he will miss if he does not speak to the world.
I think he will be the second person since President Barack Obama also received his Nobel Peace Prize not to really address the press as well. So be elected not to. We have no rhyme or reason why you shouldn't have done it. But
what is he going to say? Thank you, thank you, thank you. It's not, it's embarrassing. You got the
not
Nobel.
Really thank you, but it's just been a tradition, of course, for every, like what Wangari Maathai did as well. I mean,
Inspire us.
Yeah,
we remember moments like that, and there are preciously few moments like this globally, where actually you have leadership that is, in a sense, giving us an alternative to the demagogic, polarized and divisive leadership that you see in several countries at the moment.
So do we have bugbears and fears that maybe this particular also prize may go the way and Sung or
Aung San Suu Kyi.
Yes, after getting all this, then we have a humanitarian catastrophe in that particular country as well.
So I don't want to be, because I think there has been very good words said by my friends here. I don't want to be that cynic, but I think if you look at the previous recipients of the Nobel Peace Prize, I think you can say about it, with an exception of the former President of the United States, Barack Obama, and him. And so, to me, it starts to, again, I don't want to be a cynic here. It seems it's more of a hype. Because these prizes now seems to be given to people prematurely who have really not proven anything yet. We have our own Ibrahim Prize for Leadership. Mo Ibrahim has it, and he has a criteria when he does issue those prizes. And these criteria actually a person is given a gift after they finish their term in office. So I think I question the criteria used by the committee on issuing this. However, I congratulate Ahmed for what he's doing.
Thank you. Let's hear from Dr. Hassan Honete.
The election of Abiy Ahmed reminded also the election of Barack Obama But compared to the United States of America, Abiy has an enviable task of lording over divided nations of Ethiopia and trying to actually create a nation into a very multinational state. However, one thing that stood out in his speech for me as a citizen of the continent of the Horn, he said something I think we've been discussing a lot in this region with regard to foreign influence, and I will quote him: "We do not want the Horn of Africa to be a battleground for superpowers, nor a hideout for the merchants of terror and brokers of despair and misery."
Thank you.
I think he captured the mood of the region and the continent.
Thank you. As we're winding up as well, let's hear from Sewe just briefly. Don't you think also maybe what Sungi is raising is very valid, that after maybe your term is when now we can actually use that particular criteria to award you this particular prize?
Yeah.
Briefly. You'd finished?
No.
Briefly. Yeah,
Yes.
because of time.
It's the Nobel's also not just awarded based on the accomplishment, but the promise of actually what you may do. And because that inspiration, it also allows you, based on that recognition, that it calls upon you to actually do more. It's kind of an encouragement that, well, you got a B, but I'm going to give you an A for trying really hard, so you work better next time.
Thank you. Just a moment, let's hear from Sewe.
Just to add my voice into it, you see, we should also create a culture of making sure that we respect what the way the committees normally work at the end of the day. The problem that is being associated with this particular award, that problem started in 1998. And when he took office, it only took him 2 years to make sure that actually he brought an arbitration or a guidance on the same. Something that had taken over 20 years for different actors in the chain to make sure that they contribute to it at the end of the day. The issue of whether we are supposed to wait until probably he serves his term is something that can be discussed, but it depends with the terms and conditions of the committee that has been given the mandate to make that decision. A good example is Kipchoge made a record in 1 hour, 59 seconds. Probably 2 weeks or 1 year later, somebody will come and break it at the end of the day. Does it mean that he never performed? During that particular time, in that particular situation, he made a decision that served the humanity at that particular point.
Thank
so
you.
I think, in my own view, it deserves.
Last comment.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Gentlemen, I want to appreciate you. It's been a long year, and you've been faithfully coming. I want to say thank you so much. Dr. Hassan Khanenje, Ahmed Hashi, Dr. Virunga Simiyu, though you're not here.
He was not here.
Yeah,
You shouldn't get a share of
We are
our...
good- we are glad to have
No.
found him.
Simiyu should not get
So
some.
this is
He
the
just
second
came
time.
here the other day.
Yes.
I've been doing this for a very long time.
Yeah. So even as we're winding up, we just want to wind up in style a bit, and
Cake.
my colleagues are here as well to just come and appreciate you on behalf of many panelists that we've always been having on the show, and for our viewers that have been consistently also watching AM Live. We have Zachary Munyi saying, always a pleasure watching Standing on Guard. The richness of wisdom in this gentleman is inspiring. I hope none of them ever becomes a politician. And if they do, I hope they will learn from Abiy, critical thinkers right there, right? And here we are. We want to appreciate you, right? Okay, let me just try and clear this desk so that we can put it here. And we'll just ask you also to just come over. We celebrate together. I hope not all of you are tethered, except for...
We're all tethered.
Yeah. Or we can actually just put it, just take it to the panelists. I think that's better. Yeah.
Somewhere here.
Just take it at the center so that they don't have to come. No. Just over there so we can.
No.
All of us.
No, but we can remove it.
No, we don't have to.
Why do you remove?
Why do you remove it? Because the audience, they want to hear what how good the cake is going to taste.
So
And it says,
my colleague,
happy holidays, AM Live. And it has a Christmas cap. That's really amazing.
yes.
But yes,
So,
Simiyu ataanza. Huyu mtu yetu kutoka huko
Okay.
Western wacha anze. Inakaa kama
All
Afrino.
right. So just
How is it done?
Just use your right hand and cut it.
always say kata keki speedy. Kata keki speedy. Kata keki speedy sana.
Kata cake.
Kata keki speedy.
Are we supposed to finish the whole thing?
Nipe hiyo kubwa. Nipe hiyo kubwa. Nipe hiyo kubwa sana.
That's it.